Hello, and welcome to the third season of Illinois LawCast, a podcast about the wisdom, wit, and curiosity of the University of Illinois College of Law. I'm your host, Chris Davies, and this episode is all about the Office of Career Planning and Professional Development. My first guest is Greg Miarecki, Executive Assistant Dean and leader of the Careers Office. He shares a bit of background on why we have this office and how the talented lawyer counselors make a difference for our students. My second guest is Matthew Clegg, Director of Career Planning and a career counselor, who breaks down the work he does with students and his focus on public interest. I'm grateful to both for their time and hope you enjoy this episode. Greg Miarecki, thank you very much for joining me today.
Chris, good to be here.
Let's start with just a brief overview. What is the Office of Career Planning and Professional Development, and how do you help our students?
Well, that's a short question. It could be a long answer, depending on how long you have. The Office of Career Planning and Professional Development does what I think similar offices do in a lot of law schools, right? We work with students to market their strengths, to be able to get the employment that they're looking for. And that is, that's a pretty standard function. We do it differently than a lot of schools, I think. And we are more broadly embedded in the law school than your average career services office. So we teach classes. We are engaged with student groups. We run events in lots of different contexts. So I would say here that we are a much more visible force, if you will, than I think you would see in an average law school. I personally teach a class called Fundamentals of Legal Practice, which is when I first created the class 12 years ago, I used to say that it was everything you needed to be a successful lawyer that most law schools don't care about and most law students don't know about. There's been a change. The ABA actually requires law schools to do these talk about these kinds of things. So that's not strictly true anymore. But we are heavily involved in a lot of different aspects of the law school. And I think that we have a very visible presence among the student body. And I think that helps us deliver top quality services.
Yeah. What makes the career office important to students? What is the real benefit to them of you guys being here?
Well, I guess that's all a matter of opinion, right? But, different students probably will have different views. What do we bring to the table? Well, first of all, when you come into law school, by definition, you probably don't know all that much about the legal market, right? You probably don't know what employers are looking for, at least not to the level that we do. We've worked with thousands of students. We've worked with thousands of employers. We have conducted, the four of us together in the office have conducted probably somewhere between 10 and 20,000 mock interviews over the course of our careers. So we've seen the game occur over and over again, and we've watched, it's sort of like an insurance company, right? I mean, every individual person has a different experience, but when you aggregate them, you have a better sense of what works. And I think our experience in working with students and employers is certainly big, and we are all practicing lawyer. We have all been practicing at a very high level. I was a partner at a firm in Chicago for a number of years. I was there for about 14 years, and everybody in our office that's a lawyer has that substantial practice experience. So those are some things I think, many things that we bring to the table, but a couple that I would mention right off the top.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about your background and what brought you to Illinois Law.
Sure. So when I was a law student, I had a pretty hard time finding a job. My career services office at another law school had a single person in it with piles of paper all over the place. I then ended up at Winston Strawn, and I was a commercial litigator, and I did a lot of commercial and white-collar work. I also had a special focus on trial work. But one of the things that I turned out, I think I was better than the average associate at Winston Strawn, was I was good at working with younger lawyers and getting them to do things that most people didn't think young lawyers could do. So I was able to train younger lawyers to take and defend depositions, cross-examine witnesses, and I was able to do that better than most people. And so when this opportunity arose, that's why somebody sent it to me and said, you should apply for this job because you're doing it anyway here at the firm. And so that's ultimately how I arrived here.
So did it become kind of like a passion for you then? Or left what you got your law degree to do ostensibly to do this?
No, I didn't start out doing this. I went to law school and I ultimately went to my firm thinking that I would be a U.S. attorney. I wanted to be a criminal lawyer and a U.S. attorney, and I ended up doing pretty well. I worked with a lot of people in my firm. They helped me get an interview at the U.S. Attorney's Office. And it was fantastic. I did really well in the interview process, and I got all the way to the U.S. Attorney. I ended up not getting the job. But then I ultimately stayed at Winston and had a fantastic career working with a lot of great people. That experience taught me that your career is not going to roll out the way you think it will. And I think that's one of the most important things that we do here in our office. We try to help students understand that there's other things that you might want to do that you might not have even thought of. And that's, I think, one of the benefits of having a very sort of aggressive hands-on counseling model that engages in thousands of interactions a year is you can have those kinds of frank conversations.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the things you do. You mentioned a few. We can't get into everything. We don't have time, but you've got your counselors offering one-on-one counseling, and obviously you said you teach a class. What are some of like the big highlights of the offerings from your office?
So those are obviously very important. I think that the highlights of the offerings really are bringing people that understand the market and bringing them to the students and having one-on-one conversations in a way that's, I think quite helpful. We also do a lot of employer outreach. My colleague Matthew Clegg focuses on government and public service careers. So there's a number of students that are interested in those sorts of careers. And Matthew works with those folks specifically. And so we have a series of public interest programs that we bring to students. We do a number, because the recruiting process has accelerated dramatically and has gone mainly online, right? There used to be the deal where firms would come down to campus and you would be doing interviews in little cubby holes. That's no longer the case. That new system requires your career services office to have strong connections to the employers. And I am actually based in Chicago. I work on Wacker Drive, and most of the law firms are on Wacker Drive up in Chicago. And so it's easy for me to wander around the city, or not really wander, but to connect with employers in the city. And so I have very good relationships with a lot of the firms in the city. And our student body is small enough where I can look at a group of students and a group of firms and say, okay, this person would be a good fit for this firm. What about talking to that firm about this student? That kind of connectivity, I think, is relatively unusual.
Yeah.
And we offer a number of events that are designed to try to connect our students to the firms. We in fact are going to have about 15 firms come down to campus in the fall. We're fully subscribed. They're going to come and do what we call first look events. They're designed to give students an introduction of the firm and frankly an introduction of their area of the law that they might want to focus on. One of the challenges that I think every first-year student has is they don't really necessarily know anything about law school because they haven't been in it. And so part of what we try to do is to give them some framing questions, things to think about other than, what kind of law do you want to practice? Like, what kind of life do you want? Questions that are not strictly speaking lawyer questions, but they're people questions. And I think that those are some of the things that we do that I think add value. You
mentioned the first look events that you're doing and the fact that recruiting has changed in recent years. Can you talk through what you have seen in the market and how you guys have adapted to that?
Sure. So actually the first look series is pretty good. We used to have an event called First Look, and it was a bunch of firms that we brought to the Willis Tower, formerly the Sears Tower, up in Chicago. And it's basically a job fair where you can talk to firms and firms can get to know you. And we used to call that First Look. Well, once the recruiting process moved into the fall, we renamed that event in Chicago, and we still have it. It's called Closer Look, right? And so First Look is our series of events down in Champaign where firms are going to parade down and meet students. We now have Closer Look in January, and so students are able to, if they're up in Chicago for the break, which many are, or you can get to Chicago more easily than Champaign. We're going to have a big event at the Willis Tower. We're going to have about 45 firms, 20 on each night, and students will have an opportunity to visit with firms. I would also say one of the things about Illinois that's, I think, quite distinctive is the student body, the 2Ls and 3Ls, are active partners of ours. For example, our Corporate and Business Law Association is in the process of developing a 4-day firm visit run by students. I have very little involvement in it other than friendly kind of consulting. And they're going to create a 4-day event that's going to bring students 1Ls to a number of firms in the city of all different types. You don't see that in every law school. And I think that's one of the students' willingness, the 2Ls and 3Ls willingness to support the 1Ls, I think is very heartening and frankly quite distinctive.
With 1Ls being, you mentioned they don't come in necessarily knowing things. Is your work shifting earlier in law school and getting them ready earlier than it used to be?
Yeah, I would say, 1Ls know a lot. They know a lot of things, but they don't necessarily know the difference between a tort and a contract and a lot of the niceties that they would have if they were in law school for a year before recruiting. So that has presented a challenge. So we've got students coming in that are trying to figure out the difference between a tort and a contract, which I didn't know before I started law school. So they're having to learn all that stuff. And then at the same time, we have to start talking to them about the career search. So it has accelerated the process. And I think for anybody in any law school, it's going to be probably somewhat exhausting. The good news is it'll be relatively brief, right? The process is relatively brief. It won't stretch over as long a time. But I think it's challenging for every law school in the country and every law student in the country. And it's the source of much hand-wringing among many of my colleagues. Everybody says, well, we should, tell firms to do it differently. But the reality is there's thousands of firms and hundreds of markets, and they're not just going to do whatever we tell them. So our philosophy is if firms are looking to recruit, employers are looking to recruit, we're going to do our best to assist them no matter when and where they need to be.
You mentioned Matthew Clegg, who's got the public interest side of things. Who else is in your office and how are they helping students?
Sure. So we have 3 attorneys in the office that work with me. Matthew's one of them. We have 2 others, Alex Pillar, who's a former IP litigator. And then we have Katie McDermott, who is, she's actually a graduate of the College of Law. So is Matthew, by the way. All 4 of us work with students directly. So they all are assigned a group of students to work with. And then we also have Valita Austin and Amber LeBeau, who are with us. They're not attorneys, but they run our office. So Valita works a lot with the internal folks in the building, whether it be events or budgeting, the dean's office. And then Amber will work with a lot of our partners. In fact, Amber and I were on a call with one of the big Chicago firms just before I came over here, which is why I was late, talking through what they're thinking about doing for the recruiting cycle and us giving them, candid advice on how they can do it better.
And how do students get connected with your office? Is it something that they reach out on their own? Are they assigned? How does that work?
So most 1Ls are pretty motivated to connect with us. So everybody's assigned a counselor. So the way it's going to work, as a matter of fact, today at about 3:00, I'll be going and doing the 1L, my sort of 1L orientation talk. And it's just going to be an introductory conversation to talk to them about exactly that. And the way that'll roll out in about 2 or 3 weeks, we'll do another session where we'll talk about some next steps. And then we will invite students to make individual appointments with us. And during the course of September, October, and probably somewhat in November, we'll have individual one-on-one meetings with the students and attorney counselors. We also, further to my comments about the 2Ls and 3Ls, we have a series of career advising assistants who are part of our team. There's students that are effectively serving as counselors of sorts. And each student will also be assigned a career advising assistant. And that person will be kind of a mentor to them and help provide career support throughout their time at the College of Law.
That sounds excellent and very comprehensive for the students. Is there anything we haven't covered that you think is important to know about the Careers Office?
I would make a broader point about the office. I mentioned earlier that we're deeply involved in all aspects of the College of Law. Helping someone get a job is really not our only concern. The thing that I lay awake wondering and thinking about a lot is not just helping them get a job, but how to keep the job and excel in the job. And so our office is an advocate for students' professional development throughout the entire law school. So we have been heavily involved in promoting and getting a lot of the initiatives that are here at the College of Law advanced. We were involved. I have some involvement in the Corporate Counsel Practicum. which is our in-house in-house practicum that's led by Professor Nicholas Sharp. I direct something called our Leadership Project, which is an effort to teach students about leadership. You're not necessarily going to be a leader on day one, but if you look at statistics, most leaders end up being lawyers, right? 57% of all presidents are lawyers, 51% of senators, 30% of House members, 9% of CEOs of Fortune 500 are lawyers. So we will teach students about leadership. That's something else that's out there. In our Anderson Center is something that I was actually the initial director of the Anderson Center before we were able to attract Professor Giotto. And that was all designed in part to try to develop experiences, whether it's academic or co-curricular, that are designed to make our students better lawyers as opposed to just more marketable. So I think that that's something distinctive that our office does, is we're all over the place, if I can be honest.
Yeah. And very responsive based on what I've heard from everyone.
I hope so.
Here.
That is so that's one of the things that I picked up in practice. In the real world, right, in the real legal world, your clients expect you to respond to it right away. And we do our very best to do that. We're not perfect, but responsiveness is something we work very hard at. We try to show students sort of how they would have to act in a professional setting, and hopefully it rubs off.
Well, Greg, thank you very much for joining me. I appreciate you taking the time to talk about your office.
Chris, it's a pleasure to be here, and look forward to hearing from a lot of future students at the College of Law in future years.
Thank you to Dean Miarecki for sharing his overview of the Office of Career Planning and Professional Development. My next conversation is with Matthew Clegg, Director of Career Planning and a career counselor. Matthew Clegg, thank you very much for joining me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, Chris.
Can you explain a little bit about what your role is in the careers office?
Yeah, I'm a career counselor. I'm also the public interest advisor. So I have the good fortune of working with about 50 to 60 students in each class. And what I love about my job most is that I will be working with a student from the beginning of their 1L year all the way through bar passage. I'll meet with them once, twice, 3 times a semester. Really, I like to think of it as it really comes in seasons. 1Ls have very different needs than 2Ls and 3Ls about their understanding about how markets work, their understanding about their place in, this new industry. So I don't know if that's a good start, but that's kind of broadly what I do.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are an Illinois grad, right?
Yeah, I'm a double Illini. I'm a Champaign Central High School graduate, and then I stuck around for my undergrad here and then law school here in the class of 2009.
And what made you want to come back to Illinois law as a career counselor?
It's a super fun place to be. I practiced law for about 4 years in Chicago at a firm called Winston Strawn, and that was a great place for me, and I'm happy that I got to do that. But I love Champaign. This is where I met my wife, and when I saw the position, we knew that we kind of wanted to come back here, and it just was a great position for me because I loved being in law school.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about your law career before coming here and what you did.
Yeah, so I was an associate with a firm called Winston Strawn in the Chicago office. I graduated in 2009, which was, the heights of the Great Recession. So it was a very interesting time in the labor market, to put it in a nice way, I'd say. And maybe part of that is why I was interested in being a career counselor, because I sort of saw what happened as a student and as an alum with some of my classmates. I worked primarily in financial services litigation. I finished after about three and a half years as a 4th-year associate.
Before that, I noticed in your bio, you did some teaching. Is that correct?
Yeah. So actually it was after I practiced until 2013. And in May of 2013, I did the New Teacher Project, which is akin to Teach for America, except you can choose where you live. And so as a 30-year-old with a wife who was working in Chicago public schools, I knew that I wanted to keep living in Chicago. So I was able to do it with the New Teacher Project, and I taught and got a master's in teaching at the same time. And I coached the baseball team and taught in Gary, Indiana for a couple of years.
Cool. And the teaching and your legal background, Do you kind of combine both of those in your role as a counselor?
I think so. If not consciously, probably subconsciously. Being a lawyer and everybody in my office is a lawyer helps a lot with this role because you know how lawyers think, you know how you thought, you know how the partners who you worked for thought, and that can be a big help. And then, of course, being a teacher, you work with all types of people, and hopefully you develop some patience and get good at some things at least.
Right. And obviously, like working with the students, is that where the passion for this job comes from for you?
For sure. I love working with the kids. I call them kids. I know they're adults. I'm sorry to all of them. Some of them are older than me. But at least on this arch of their lives and their careers, I'm senior to them because I've already graduated and I've done this. That's the fun part, is to be at least some part of their life for a few years and to see them succeed more often than not. And sometimes they don't get their number one first choice job, and then you come back and you think about what would be the next choice, what would be building you towards your ultimate goals. Because a lot of junior level jobs aren't somebody's ultimate goal. That's kind of how life works. That's certainly how this industry works. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of really viable and good paths, and helping students figure out which one works for them is fun.
Now, let's say since orientation is wrapping up as we're recording this, I'm a 1L student. I'm assigned to you as a counselor. Can you kind of walk me through how we would start our relationship? What kind of things you would offer to me as a student?
Yeah, so we'd invite you into our office in Suite 101. And the first thing, typically within 5 minutes, I'd say, I don't care what you do, Chris. I just want you to be happy. The good thing about my role is I mean it. If you want to be a prosecutor, I'd love to help you with that. If you want to, if you want to work at a large law firm, I'd love to help you with that. If you want to be in Seattle, I'd love to help you with that. I have opinions once I know what your goals are, because I've seen what works, what doesn't work well for other people with similar goals. But in terms of what your goals are, I try to figure that out first.
And then as you progress with these students, how does your role change, or how does the way you help them change?
Well, it depends on the student. Mm-hmm. And there's a wide variety of sophistication levels amongst the students. They're all very smart, of course. But my parents weren't lawyers. When I came to Illinois law, I wouldn't consider myself all that sophisticated in terms of how the legal market worked. And while I had worked a little bit before I came to law school, it wasn't I wasn't immersed in how the legal market worked. So I have a lot of empathy with students like that, and I understand what it feels like to not really know your place in it quite yet. But then we have students who might have, been a professional for 5, 10, sometimes 20, 30 years. They might have been paralegals. So you try to, in general, match with what their actual need is. But a common need early on would be help them know what they should know, mm-hmm. and let go of the things that they don't need to be worrying about yet is, in general, a good goal.
Okay. Now, that's kind of your career counselor role. You also specialize with public interest work, sure. Correct?
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about what that means in your role and how you have that public interest focus?
Sure. So, my first job after college was working at Cunningham Children's Home in mm-hmm. Urbana. And public interest work was something that I always considered very admirable amongst the attorneys in my class, and then certainly with the students that I work with. But I would say my role as a career counselor is working with public interest students. So over the past, I would say 7 years or so, since Professor Shina left the role and I got to take the public interest students, I've seen the industry and know the players and how the federal government does their hiring, how the state of Illinois does their hiring, how nonprofits do their hiring, and just sort of knowing that niche of the industry through meeting practitioners, through seeing students go through the processes. The time horizon for being hired varies very greatly mm-hmm. For lawyers, for first entry-level lawyers. And the public interest space, which here we would incorporate much government work to, from public defending or to federal government work, say, you're not going to get hired super early the way some big law firms do. So in many respects, it's part of my favorite part of the job, because these are students that, based off the nature of their interests, are not likely to be hired as quickly, not because of any fault of their own, but because the industry isn't hiring you. These types of employers don't have budgets to make hiring decisions years in advance.
One of the things that I was talking about with Greg Miarecki was how the hiring schedule has changed, kind of accelerated. Is that also true with public interest, or are there other ways you've seen in your time in the role that public interest jobs have changed and you've adapted?
100%. It's true that they have accelerated broadly in public interest. 7 years ago, many prosecution offices or state level offices wouldn't be making junior lawyer offers until after the bar exam. These days, it might happen at much higher frequencies during their 3L year, even before they graduate. Now, compared to some of their friends who might be going to big law, it's still a year, it's still a year or a year and a half later than them. So from the perspective of the student, it might feel like it's slow or behind. But from the perspective of how the industry was moving maybe 6 years ago, it is accelerated.
Is that a challenge for you as the counselor to, make sure that the students are doing what they need to do, or keeping them motivated when things aren't as quick as someone who is entering like a private practice?
Well, specifically with public interest students, motivation isn't usually much of a problem. These are students that have options elsewhere, typically, and they really want to do. They tend to be mission driven. So motivation, not necessarily, but certainly it's normal to see other people that you or your peers finish a task before you and think that you're doing something wrong. And maybe you are and maybe you aren't. And being a sounding board and being able to say, actually, from what I can tell, you're doing it right. You're optimizing your chances. Or actually, here's 6 things that maybe you could do. And it's not going to make them hire you tomorrow, but it could make it happen more quickly.
Yeah. So it sounds like a lot of what you've said and the things that you do are very individual. I'm wondering, without maybe naming individuals, do you have some success stories of students that have you've been able to counsel either in private practice or public interest?
Yeah, absolutely. So every time a student likes their first job, I consider it a success. I've helped students get employed with the EPA, recently with the DOJ, with clerkships. Oftentimes that's a thing that students are very passionate about. I find it just as rewarding when a student gets a job, in their hometown at their public defender's office that only hires one person because the county is not that large. Mm-hmm. We had a student working at Earth Justice this past summer. And I know he loved that. So when the student loves what they get to do, I find it successful. And I guess from a professional perspective, if it takes longer and then they finally get it, maybe I like that.
Yeah.
Probably the student likes it better when they get it right away.
Sure. If you had to say like one thing about the job that is your favorite thing, what would that be?
I like meeting 1Ls if I have to choose one favorite thing, because, and I would have potentially told you this when you're a 1L, Chris, and I say it to everybody, and maybe you'll have to cut this, but like there's nothing as adorable as a 1L because we were all two lawyers, because we were all 1Ls, and especially your first semester, and you're swimming in it a little bit, and that you're supposed to, try really hard, and you're supposed to be active, and but you don't know what a tort is, and that is fun, and certainly I feel like in terms of initial guidance, I'd like to think that like my office and that I can be useful to 1Ls. Not that we're not useful later on, but there's just such a learning curve, and that's fun.
Now, the 1Ls are very fun. Does your role with students end when they graduate, or do you remain in contact and a resource to alumni as well?
Yeah, we're definitely resources to alumni. But the truth is, we see the students a lot more. We're sitting in the building. The students are walking down the hall. I like to talk to them. And recently, as Dean Miarecki mentioned, and you brought up, the hiring has happened sooner, more in recent years, that the vast majority of our alums from the most recent class are already employed and they've already sat for the bar and now they're starting their job. So as much as I hope they liked working with me, they're not calling me as much anymore. 5-7 years ago, when maybe the hiring was slower, we were working more with the recent grads later into the fall. And then, I'll get an email once, twice a month from alumni that I worked with from the class of 15 or 16, or sometimes people from my class when we were students together, or from the 70s, 80s, or 90s, looking to hire somebody, looking to make a career change. Hey, I've been in, I don't know why I wanted to say New Hampshire. I've never actually had somebody say I was in New Hampshire, even though I think nobody's told me that, but I'm in this location and now I want to move to Chicago. What are some advice?
Well, is there anything else about your job, about public interest, that I haven't asked you that it would be important to know?
I don't know what people consider important. We didn't mention, or I didn't mention, that we try to bring in, and in fact do bring lawyers in from the public interest space every semester. I help with Dean Miarecki's class called The Fundamentals of Legal Practice. We have a public interest session. We have what we call the public interest field trip, where the last few years we've been taking, usually in the low 30s, students to Chicago, into the state of Illinois Attorney General's office, meeting with some civil legal aid attorneys over a lunch at Jenner and Block, who's been hosting us, and then going to the city of Chicago as well. So we have a lot of sort of events and programs in the public interest space, as we do in the private sector space too.
Awesome. Matthew Clegg, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me.
Good to do it. Thanks.
Thank you to Matthew Clegg and Greg Miarecki for their time and sharing so much great information about their work in the Careers Office. Thanks to you, our listeners, as well. As we kick off our third season, we're trying to bring more great episodes about the College of Law. If you have any comments or suggestions for future episodes, please email us at podcast@law.illinois.edu. Illinois LawCast is available on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you find your podcasts. This episode was recorded, mixed, and edited by me, Chris Davies. Special thanks to Kelly Moss for our album art and other graphics. Thanks also to Krista Getke for her help in the editing process. Until next time, thanks again for listening to Illinois LawCast.